Subsection B, Phenomenology of Mind, Consciousness, Supersection B, Self-Consciousness, Selbstbewusstsein, Metasection Gamma, Universal Self-Consciousness. Encyclopedia section 436, Universal Self-Consciousness is the affirmative awareness of self in another self. Each self as a free individuality has his own absolute independence, yet in virtue of the negation of its immediacy or appetite without distinguishing itself from that other, each is thus universal self-conscious and objective. Each has real universality in the shape of reciprocity, so far as each knows itself recognized in the other free man, and is aware of this in so far as it recognizes the other and knows him to be free. Encyclopedia section 437. The unity of consciousness and self-consciousness implies in the first instance the individuals mutually throwing light upon each other, but this difference between those who are thus identified is mere vague diversity. Or rather, it is a difference which is none. Hence, its truth is the fully and really existent universality and objectivity of self consciousness, which is reason, the distinction between notion and reality, which reason unifies. Subsection B, Phenomenology of Mind, Consciousness, Supersection C, Reason, De Vernunft. Encyclopedia section 438. The essential and actual truth which reason is lies in the simple identity of the subjectivity of the notion, which its objectivity, which is objectivity and universality. The universality of reason, therefore, whilst it signifies that the object which was only given in consciousness, qua consciousness, is now itself universal, permeating and encompassing the ego, also signifies that the pure ego is the pure form which overlaps the object and encompasses it without it. Encyclopedia section 439. Self consciousness thus certify that its determinations are no less objective or determination of the very being of things than they are its own thoughts is reason, which as such an identity is not only the absolute substance, but the truth that knows it. For truth here has, as its peculiar mode and immanent form, the self centered pure notion, ego, the certitude of self as infinite universality. وحدة الوجود. Truth, aware of what it is mind, spirit. At this point, one says, as did congregational leader Al Shafi, that I believe that I am right with the possibility I may be incorrect. And I believe that you are wrong with the possibility that you may be correct. All that follows is zeitgeist. Section 1, Subjective Mind. Subsection C, Psychology, Mind, der Geist. Encyclopedia section 440. Mind has defined itself as the truth of soul in consciousness, the former a simple immediate totality, the latter now an infinite form which is not, like consciousness, restricted by that content, and does not stand in mere correlation to as to its object, and does not stand in mere correlation to it as its object, but is an awareness of this substantial totality, neither subjective nor objective. Mind, therefore, starts only from its own being and is in correlation only with its own features. Psychology accordingly studies the faculties or general modes of mental activity, qua mental vision, ideation, remembering, and such things, apart both from the content, which on the phenomenon side is found in empirical ideation, in thinking also, and in desire and will, and from the two forms in which these modes exist, in light of which exists in soul as a physical mode, and in consciousness itself as a separately existence object of that consciousness, as a separately existence object of that consciousness. The content which is elevated to intuitions is its sensations. It is its intuitions also which are transmuted into representations, and its representations which are transmuted again into thoughts, and so on. In summary of this, if you're listening to the English that I've called from the William Wallace translation of Philosophy of Mind, and my summary, which tracks about 75 to 80% of what was written uh, in form of a legal outline, you may hear what to your ear sounds like strange English sentences. That is because this has been taught so frequently in the language of political science and not psychology that it is helpful for the individual sentences and clauses and phrases, the breaks of German, and then my pronunciation of the German, the fits and stops, etc., that you don't recall some phrase that you've heard. And you've heard it said a particular way in a particular type. So there are times that I've read before and that we will read going forward where the phrase sounds strange. That is so you listen to it and you don't think you know what it means. Uh, that's the goal of it, however you approach it. Encyclopedia section 441. The soul is finite, so far as its features are immediate or con-natural. Consciousness is finite, insofar as it has an object. Mind is finite, insofar as, though it no longer has an object, it has a mode in its knowledge. In essence, it is finite by means of its immediacy, or what is the same thing, by being subjective or only a notion. And it is a matter of no consequence, which is defined as its notion, and which, as the reality of that notion, and it is a matter of no consequence, which is defined as its notion, and which, as the reality of that notion, say that its notion is the utterly infinite objective reason. Then its reality is knowledge or intelligence. Say that knowledge is its notion, then its reality is that reason. And the realization of knowledge consists in appropriating reason. And the realization of knowledge consists in appropriating reason. Hence, the finitude of mind is to be placed in the temporary failure of knowledge to get hold of the full reality of its reason, or equally in the temporary failure of reason to attain full manifestation in knowledge. Reason at the same time is only infinite so far as it is absolute freedom, so far That is, as presupposing itself for its knowledge to work upon, it thereby reduces itself to finitude and appears as everlasting movement of superseding this immediacy of comprehending itself and being a rational knowledge. In essence, it is only infinite so far as it is sovereign knowledge. Encyclopedia section 442. The progress of mind is development, insofar as its existent phase, by way of knowledge, involves as its intrinsic purpose and burden that utter and complete autonomy which is rationality, in which case the action of translating this purpose into reality is strictly only a nominal passage over into manifestation, and is even there a return into itself so far as knowledge which has not shaken off its original quality of mere knowledge is only abstract or formal. The goal of mind is to give its objective fulfillment, and thus at the same time produce its freedom. The development here meant is not that of the individual, which has a certain anthropological. The development here is not that of the individual, which has a certain anthological character, where faculties and forces are regarded as successively emerging and presenting themselves in external existence, a series of steps on the ascertainment on which there was for a long time great stress laid by the system of Condillac, as if a conjectural natural emergence could exhibit the origin of these faculties and explain them. As the theory of Condillac states it, the sensible is not merely the empirical first, but is left as if it were the true and essential foundation. The system of Condillac, Etienne Bonnet, Abbe de Condillac, was the chief exponent of a radically empiricist account of the workings of the mind that has since come to be referred to as sensationism. Whereas John Locke's empiricism followed upon a rejection of innate principles and innate ideas, Condillac went further and rejected innate abilities as well. On his version of empiricism, experience not only provides us with ideas or the raw materials for knowledge, it also teaches us how to focus attention, remember, imagine, abstract, judge, and reason. It forms our desires and teaches us what to will. Moreover, it provides us with the best lessons in the performance of these operations, so that a study of how we originally learned to perform them also tells us how those operations ought to be performed. The pursuit of this tenet led Condillac to articulate an early developmental psychology with explicit pedagogical and methodological implications. His concerns also led him to focus on the theory of perception and to advance important and original views on our perception of spatial form. He offered a more searching, careful, and precise account of what exactly is given to us by each of the sense organs than any that had been offered up to his day, and presented a highly nuanced account of how this raw data is worked up into our beliefs about the world around us. He taught us that only by teaching what we have learned can we know how we learned it, and knowing how we learned a thing is valuable in and of itself. Similarly, if the activities of mind are treated as mere manifestations, forces, perhaps in terms stating their utility or suitability for some other interests of head or heart, there is no indication of the true final aim of the whole business. And this is the only rational mode of studying the mind in its various activities. Encyclopedia section 443, as consciousness has for its object the stage which preceded it, in the guise called natural soul, see section 413. So mind has, or rather makes consciousness its object. In essence, whereas consciousness is only the virtual identity of the ego with its other, see section 415, the mind realizes that identity as the concrete unity which it and it only knows. Its productions are governed by the principle of all reason that the contents are at once potentially existent and are the mind's own in freedom. Thus, if we consider the initial aspect of mind, that aspect is twofold, as being and as its own. By the one, the mind finds in itself something which is; by the other, it affirms it to be only its own. The way of mind is, therefore, A, to be theoretical. It has to do with the rational as its immediate affection, which it must render its own, or has to free knowledge from its presupposedness, and therefore from its abstractness, and make the affection subjective. When the affection has been rendered its own, and the knowledge consequently characterized as free intelligence, in essence as having its full and free characterization in itself, it is B, will, practical mind, which in the first place is likewise formal. In essence, its content so that it, C, confronts itself as free mind and thus gets rid of both its defects of one sidedness. Encyclopedia section 444. The theoretical as well as the practical mind still falls under the general range of mind subjective. They are not to be distinguished as active and passive. Subjective mind is productive, but it is a merely nominal productivity. In words, the theoretical mind produces only its ideal world and gains abstract autonomy within, while the practical, while it has to do with autonomous products, with a material which is its own, has a material which is only nominally such, and therefore a restricted content for which it gains the form of universality. Outwards, the subjective mind, which as a unity of soul and consciousness is thus also a reality at once anthropological and conformable to consciousness, has for its product, in the theoretical range, the word, and in the practical, not yet deed and action, but enjoyment. In the beginning was the Word. In the beginning was the Logos. In the beginning was the prima genus loci, the genius. The word here is equivalent to what we said before as the genius. Psychology, like logic, is one of those sciences which in modern times have yet derived least profit from the more general mental culture and the deeper conception of reason. It is still extremely ill off. The turn which the Kantian philosophy has taken has given it greater importance. It has, and that in its empirical condition, been claimed as the basis of metaphysics, which is to consist of nothing but the apprehension and the analysis of the facts of human consciousness, merely as facts, just as they are given. This position of psychology, mixing it up with forms belonging to the range of consciousness and with anthropology, has led to no improvement in its own condition, but it has had the further effect that, both for the mind as such, and for metaphysics and philosophy generally, all attempts have been abandoned to ascertain the necessity of essential and actual reality, to get at the notion and the truth. Section 1, Subjective Mind. Subsection C, Psychology. Mind, der Geist. Subsection A, Theoretical Mind. Theo is God, and reti is net, and ikal is in reference to. So theoretical is in reference to the net of God, or that which makes you fishers of men. In reference to a verse that the archangel Gabriel gave to the archangel Michael in his most praiseworthy form, it is often said that you plan and God plots, and God is the best at, of those who plots. I prefer you plan and I plot, and God is the best of those who set the trap. In this case, you cast a line, and I throw a net, and God is the best of those who leads fish to be prey. Encyclopedia section 445, Intelligence, D. Intelligence. Encyclopedia section 445, Intelligence finds itself determined. This is its apparent aspect from which it is. Intelligence finds itself determined. This is its apparent aspect from which in its immediacy it starts. But as knowledge, intelligence consists in treating what is found as its own. Its activity has to do with the empty form, the pretense of finding reason. And its aim is to realize its concept or to be reason actual, along with which the content is realized as rational. This activity is cognition, the nominal knowledge, which is only certitude elevates itself as reason is concrete to definite and conceptual knowledge. The course of this elevation is itself rational and consists in a necessary passage, governed by the concept of one grade or term of intelligent activity, a so called faculty of mind, into another. The refutation which such cognition gives of the semblance that the rational is found starts from the certitude of the faith of intelligence in its capability of rational knowledge, and in the possibility of being able to appropriate the reason, which it and the content virtually is. The distinction of intelligence from will is often incorrectly taken to mean that each has a fixed and separate existence of its own, as if volition could be without intelligence, or the activity of intelligence could be without will. A host of other phrases used of intelligence and similar faculties belong to a point of view utterly alien to the mental level or to the position of philosophic study. A favorite reflection form is that of powers and faculties of soul, intelligence or mind. Faculty, like power or force, is the fixed quality of any object of thought conceived as reflected into self. Force is no doubt the infinity of form, of the inward and the outward, but its essential finitude involves the indifference of content to form. Isolate the activities, and you similarly make the mind a mere aggregate and treat their essential correlation as an external incident. The action of intelligence as theoretical mind has been called cognition, knowledge. Yet this does not mean intelligence inter alia knows, besides which it also intuits, conceives, remembers, imagines, and similar things. The concept of possibility of cognition. The concept of possibility of cognition has come out as intelligence itself, as the certitude of reason. The act of cognition itself is therefore the actuality of intelligence. The stages of its realizing activity are intuition, conception, and memory, and other similar activities. These activities have no other eminent meaning. Their aim is solely the concept of cognition, or that they severely uh, their aim is solely the concept of cognition, or that they severally procure a cognitive satisfaction of their own, and that lead to a glorification of the delights of intuition, remembrance, imagination. But the true satisfaction, it is admitted, is only afforded by an intuition permeated by intellect and mind, by rational conception, by products of imagination, which are permeated by reason and exhibit ideas. In a word, by cognitive intuition, cognitive conception, and similar activities. The truth ascribed to such satisfaction lies in this: that intuition, conception, and similar activities are not isolated, and exist only as moments in the totality of cognition itself.